With that, I have the privilege of introducing our speakers. We have Amy Dozier, Jeff Thompson, Jody Erickson, and our moderator, Isaiah Surratt here. And they are going to be discussing the evolution of brand protection programs. So thank you and enjoy.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Cool. Thanks, Ben. We're here to discuss the evolution of brand protection programs. Everybody who's participated in all the previous sessions this week have had the benefit of hearing from Brittany and Nancy about the 7 key elements of a brand protection program. Now I have to remember what else we did. And then we move into it would help if I showed this. So everybody's been going through the overall Mark Monitor approach in each breakout. It's been broken out by section. During Aquino, Noam, and Megan's speech or panel discussion earlier in the week, they talked about how to utilize some technology to identify those global risks and inform the design of your program. And then we moved into the Execute program where Troy, Drew and Amy from Mark Monitor, who she gets to share the stage again, along with Dory Kruger from Build-A-Bear, presented on the enforcement strategies that work, some that don't, and then some ways to get creative when nothing else has really worked. And then just before this last break, you heard from Ben Wellman and Ricard about measuring the efforts of your brand protection program. How do you show the value of the activity and of the program that you've created with your Mark Monitor team, and how do you best sell that up the line to make sure that it's something that you can sustain and keep doing for a while to come. So now we get to bring you into the last brand breakout on evolution of a brand protection program. So in today's discussion, we have 3 of our most experienced senior customer success managers with Jody, Jeff, and Amy. And we're going to talk about tips, tricks, tactics in more of a storytelling case study setup to inform you guys of what are some things that work, what are some things that we've tried that don't. There's a lot of elements that go into a brand protection program, as you've heard, and as a result, there's a lot of different elements that can lead to the need to evolve. So, Jody, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, let everybody know who you are.
So my name's Jody Erickson. I've been with Mark Monitor now for just over 10 years in various roles. I started out as an analyst and eventually moved into an analyst supervisor role and currently customer success manager. Interesting fact about me, I'm an avid trail runner. My nickname on the trail is Yard Cell because I tend to fall a lot and skin my knees. So that's a little bit about me. Jeff?
Fantastic. My name is Jeff Thompson. It's a pleasure to make your guys' acquaintance from up here on stage. I've been with Mark Monitor for just under 4 years now. I started out as a brand analyst myself, worked mainly in the marketplaces module on consumer goods. I've branched out from that, and I do a lot of website financial work. I do a lot of different verticals right now. I do a lot in the automotive industry, just touching on a little bit of everything right now. A little interesting tidbit about me, I am a veteran of the U.S. Army. I did that many years ago, and when I used to be much smaller and do a lot more running myself, I avoid that at all costs at this point in time. But just something from my past.
My name is Amy Dozier. I've been with Mark Monitor Senior Customer Success Manager. I've been with Mark Monitor for 6 years now. I failed miserably at the fun fact on myself yesterday, so just know that I'm fascinating, I'm hilarious, and that's all you need to know.
This is all true.
Not even going to try today.
That's a fun fact. That does capture Amy's personality
In a nutshell.
in a nutshell. That's perfect. And again, I'm Isaiah Seralt. I'm the program manager of the Customer Success program for the brand department at Mark Monitor. So I have the privilege of working with Jody, Jeff, and Amy, and the rest of the global customer success team on a regular basis to make sure that we're utilizing best practices, delivering a consistent, excellent customer experience to all of our clients. And as our new CEO, Jerry Stead, would say, that everybody is delighted by their experience with us. So about me, I've been back at Mark Monitor for about 3.25 years now. I had the opportunity to work for Mark Monitor in the very early stages in 2003 to 2005. So to be able to see the evolution of not just the brand protection industry, but to see how Mark Monitor has continued to lead and be a major player, the major player in the industry for that amount of time has been an awesome thing to witness. I think without further ado, we'll jump right into the content. It seems an obvious question, but how do we really know when it's time to evolve a program? I think that's a good place to start. Jody, so we'll start with you since you're closest to me. In your experience, what are a couple of triggers or compelling factors that would lead a client to adapt and evolve their program?
So there are many factors that would lead to evolving a brand protection program. One of the main ones that we see, fairly obvious, I'm sure, is client-driven changes. A big one is new product releases. So we see that, across all the different verticals. Just an example, I have an electronics client that I work with, and they've been with us for several years. And whenever they're getting or preparing to release a new product, they will alert us ahead of time, and we will usually begin setting up scans and monitoring for those products about a month in advance. And on one occasion, usually, we don't see a whole lot, but we want to do it proactively just in case anything is listed out there prior to the release date. And sure enough, one year, their new product showed up on Amazon in one of their listings, and we had been monitoring and reporting to them daily, what the findings were. We'd ramped up the program to the regular reporting of daily rather than monthly, just to keep an eye on it. And we found that listing on Amazon, reported it to our clients. They took that information internally, were able to identify which distributor it was that had listed the product, and within 24 hours, the listing was down. The listing was a good listing. It wasn't, non-genuine product. There was nothing wrong with it. It was just that the distributor had made the mistake of listing it too early. And through our monitoring and reporting to the client, we were able to mitigate that, within a fairly short time period. Another time when we've had to, I have a software client as well that I've been working with for years and years, and very similar circumstance. They release new editions of the software on, a fairly regular basis. The one that sticks out to me is it was one of the biggest releases that they had as far as since I've worked with them, and it's been about 10 years. And it was when the software was still released on disk, not digitally. And we had been monitoring, scanning, monitoring, reporting to them for probably, I think we started about 8 weeks in advance, because they had released the product to several of their beta testers. They had a beta testing program. And their concern was that that product would be released and be sold out on the internet, even though it violated the terms and conditions of the beta testing program. And sure enough, we started seeing an increase in those listings being out there. We were able to enforce on them. But I think the most interesting part about it, by evolving the client program this way, client-directed change, we were able to report this information to the client. They were able to identify several of the beta testers that had gone out and sold this product, or attempted to, prior to the product being released. And so from that point, they basically removed those beta testers from the program for violating those terms and conditions. So those are a couple examples I have of client-driven changes.
Those are great. So Amy, again, you're another one of our tenured senior people with a lot of large strategic accounts that require flexibility and a dynamic approach. What are some other changes that you've
I
seen?
think of seasonal changes. So we have some sports leagues where, whether it be a beginning of a new season or playoffs, will definitely impact, we have to pivot quite quickly, or not even necessarily quickly, because we know it's coming in some cases, and so we're able to prepare for that. Or perhaps the holidays. So we have, maybe during Halloween, we're concerned with, counterfeit costumes or something along those lines. Or as we move into the holiday season, pajamas, things like that you wouldn't think of in March, but come October, it's very important for us to be able to switch gears and evolve that to cover those more seasonal type time periods.
Great. What are some other, so we've talked about things that I would kind of consider within the client's control to an extent. So our customers have, typically the seasonal changes are something they know about. If it's a sports league, we know playoffs are coming up. If it's a clothing line, maybe they have the fall release or summer fashions that come out that they want to make sure are being monitored more closely, so we can proactively adapt our scans and our reporting accordingly. What are some examples that you guys can think of from your experience that highlight unforeseen changes that lead to the need to evolve and adapt your tactics and strategies?
I think one thing that is odd to think about right now, but 10 years ago, Wish.com didn't exist, Pinterest didn't exist. Facebook Marketplaces just came along maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and so I think new platforms and the rise in popularity of specific platforms, I think, can sometimes be surprising, and so our ability to adjust to those changes, again, outside of a client control, really outside of Mark Monitor control, but to be able to respond to those, I think we do a really nice job.
Yeah, and just to tag on to what Amy was saying, just an overall change in the landscape, forces everyone to evolve. Back 10 years ago when I first started with Mark Monitor, the main concern that we saw in the brand protection arena was marketplaces and website infringements. And so that's where the majority of our focus was at. And our clients started seeing more and more counterfeit product and other infringements as well. But the big one I remember is counterfeit products being sold on Facebook and Instagram. I had a luxury goods client. They sold their big product that was counterfeited were handbags, and we started seeing a few here and there that informants were sending in of counterfeit posts for handbags being sold on Facebook, and we started to see more and more of those. And in addition to that, we were seeing them across several verticals from various clients. And so as a company, Mark Monitor had to adapt to that change or the evolution in the landscape, develop best practices related to that, and eventually we added social media as one of our program offerings. We had to evolve, and the clients had to evolve as well. in where we were finding the infringements, and it was interesting to watch everything move. Yeah. I mean, and we still see it in marketplaces and websites, but we've seen that progression over the years to other areas as well, paid search, mobile apps.
Right.
Well, and to piggyback off that, right? I mean, we're seeing that right now currently. Anybody who works in the consumer goods knows that one of the major issues that you're having right now is in kind of social media markets in general. We've seen that trending. It really started last year and a half ago, pretty significantly in fashion. But we're seeing that start to move across the board in just about every consumer product at this point in time. So we're starting to make those suggestions, and we're trying to amp that up for the clients that we work with to be, hey, this is really something that we need to take a look at. Because at this point in time, if somebody wanted to set up like an e-commerce site or something like that around a particular brand, there was a really good chance that they were going to register a domain name that infringed on the brand's name, list their products on there to try to appear as genuine as possible. Well, in this day and age, with people using social media as their marketing arm, they don't need to do that anymore. They'll register any domain they feel like. It can be a series of numbers. They can list the IP address. They don't care. They'll put your links on it and use social media to direct you to the site. Knowing that a lot of shoppers will not only use their computers and follow these links that they're getting through email and social media, but through their mobile devices, which is a lot harder to tell the domain that you're traveling on when you're on those things. And so they're capitalizing on that. So we're having to adjust accordingly. One of the reasons that we find out about these things, and one of the things that I like working with my clients with and discussing with them, is the feedback they're getting from their client success teams, their feedback teams, their customer success teams. What are you hearing from your clients? Because that really helps us drive change on our side of the house. It's actually an interesting story around that. So one of my clients is a consumer goods, is electronic consumer goods that they do. It's a streaming device that they work with. So when they originally started contracting our services, it was around the counterfeiting of these devices and some brand confusion issues around there as well. They were really trying to break into a pretty well-established market with some other devices that were out there, so it was really important that they protected their consumer base. Well, that issue for them dried up pretty quickly because the devices themselves weren't very expensive. So counterfeiters weren't getting a whole lot of good about trying to make a cheaper device. But what they did figure out is that through their client success teams and some of the things that our analysts were seeing on their side of the house, is that there were infringers out there that were using kind of a backdoor channel on these devices to pirate stream signals, especially a huge problem they had over in the Latin American communities. So they were using this device, and then they were setting up their own basic cable base. They made their own DirecTV or Cable One or whatever streaming cable service that you desire, and create a channel on that and would charge somebody like $20, $30 using social media to reach out to find people to do this, and then register this channel and give them all the access they want. I don't know if anybody saw this. It was kind of a blip that happened probably about, I want to say 18 months ago. DragonBox ended up losing a massive court case around this because the community didn't feel like they were doing enough to mitigate pirate streaming. DragonBox, by the way, is a Kodi-enabled Android box. Obviously not my client. But they weren't doing enough to mitigate this pirating problem that they had. And so my client had seen this court ruling as well, and that made them very nervous, also with the customer success issues that they were having. And so we pivoted our program, and went from being a straight kind of counterfeit problem that they had to pivoting over to this pirate channel, searching social media, working with their digital teams to have these channels removed. And we had some giant successes over in the Latin American community, and we still kind of work back and forth with those guys today, and it's been a huge success for them so far.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great example. One of the other changes that we touched on a little bit are processes that are implemented by the various marketplaces. There's new programs that come out. There's typically a lot of questions around them. One that comes to mind is the Amazon brand registry. Do you have an example of perhaps how the brand registry has impacted work with clients in the brand protection program? If not,
well,
don't start.
I mean, let's see how well I can do this. it's a balancing act for all of us, right? I mean, the fact of the matter is you guys represent a lot of the client bases that are trying to sell legitimate product. Amazon is a massive marketplace. You know, they own a large share of e-commerce sites going on right now. They have a lot of traffic that's driven their direction. So it's really hard to be able to sell your product and want to be at the top of that market, choosing not to sell on Amazon. And some people choose to do that. If you choose to sell on Amazon, then there are things that you need to engage to make sure your product is protected. You know, because the fact of the matter is, it's a massive site. We'd like to put the onus completely on Amazon to remove all these things that from their site when they show up, but the reality is they don't have the time or bandwidth to be able to monitor every item that's on their site all the time. It's the same thing you see in social media. We want to be able to hold social media sites accountable for the things that are served on them, but there's so much data that's moving back and forth on these sites anymore that they literally just don't have the bandwidth to keep up with all of it. You know, because the actual pages themselves, the actual items themselves, for the most part, they don't own. They're leasing somebody else to go put these items out there, you know, which is why they have the Safe Harbor Act and all that to protect those companies from doing that, right? So they are trying to figure out a way of engaging us so that they can still have their legitimate sellers selling products, but that we can report things. Amazon Brand Registry is a really good example of that, because one of the things that we don't think about is that Amazon had a massive problem with sellers enforcing on each other and pretending to be us. You know, so they were trying to determine who's who, and they're just getting these assaults of these massive infringements all day long, and they had to wade through these, like, are these legitimate parties? Are these legitimate enforcements? Who are the people involved in this? So that's one of the reasons the Amazon Brand Registry has come around being. Now, is there some bumps and bruises along the way during any service when it's launched? Yeah, there is. I mean, we saw the same thing when Vero launched their eBay launched their Vero program. You know, we're always going to see this as it comes around being. Is it going to get better over time? We absolutely hope so. You know, but because of efforts like the GRM team and their outreach, they'll be able to talk to executives over at Amazon and work with those guys. The feedback that we get from you and the work that we can get done together, we can start creating a movement to make things better on the whole for all parties involved. It's never going to be perfect, but we can actually evaluate and move these things in the right direction.
Cool. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, there's luckily working within the internet industry, there's no shortage of changes, and we're constantly coming up with new and creative ways to deal with or to hopefully proactively address changes coming down that impact everybody, because pretty much everybody uses the internet. We've talked about client-driven changes. We've talked a little bit about things that happen that are outside of a client's direct control that can impact the evolution of their program. One that I think is at the top of, not the top of, but that everybody is aware of, is GDPR and the impact that it's had in, or to be able to enforce, be it websites, you know, a dearth of information for sellers on various marketplaces, because they no longer have to present things pre-enforcement in the way that they may have had to before. Can you, I think I'll shoot this one over to Amy. Can you talk a little bit about some of the changes or strategy adjustments as a result of GDPR?
Yeah, I think when GDPR first came along, some of our customers, or at least my customers, expected there to be a major change in how we approach things. And so in talking through that, and again, we're going back to like collaboration, communication, things that we've highlighted over the last couple of days, is through discussing what their priorities were. We were really able to help them understand that it didn't have as much of an impact as we thought it would. They just maybe needed to change their strategy. You know, they were very aggressive with their domain portfolio management, and they were very nervous about what GDPR meant for them. And then when we were able to talk through it, maybe move other things into monitor versus enforcing on everything, maybe looking more at website content along with a brand and domain, things like that, we were able to really give them a level of comfort that we're still able to protect their brand, just perhaps in a little different way than they first anticipated. And so it was more, again, not really an evolution, but just a change in their strategy.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great thing that I haven't likely done too a lot highlighting, is the proactive collaboration and communication between Mark Monitor, and your program and is key to success. Be it getting ahead of the curve and designing a program or designing a strategy change that anticipates the impact of a GDPR or a marketplace process change. We are much more effective in doing what we do when we know what's coming and we know how it impacts your program and which direction you may want to take it. Another thing that comes to mind when it's if we talk about laws or different regulations that can impact brand protection strategy is the various CCTLDs that we deal with. Some of them are like rogue nations that do whatever they want, it seems, and you never quite know how it's going to impact enforcement. Jeff, I know that you have some experience with working on the CCTLDs in particular.
With trying to work with the
With trying
CCTLDs to do that, yeah. So it's an interesting thing. We are a little spoiled because since we do have a registrar in-house, because we are a corporate registrar and we have people that work with these CCTLDs all the time, it allows us to start answering some questions and start inquiring things about this. Once again, Stanton's team does a lot of work, Prunes does a lot of work talking to the CCTLDs to find us different paths for like counterfeit sites and Russia or the EU or what have you. So a lot of the work that they do has made life easier on us and be able to translate that information down. It is one of those things that we have to be aware of all the time, right? Like one of the things that's really popping up that we're all probably paying attention to is Brexit, the EU, and how that's going to affect things moving forward. And something as simple as like what's happening with .eu domains, what's going to happen to all the e-commerce sites that are associated with those things. Thankfully, we have teams that are going out and finding that information and putting that into summarizing that information that we can use to help tailor programs as we move forward. It's actually really interesting that you were talking about GDPR as well. One of my clients that's in the financial vertical, who's very aggressively protects their brand, and so we'd had several conversations around that when that first came up in place about, hey, what do we need to do to react to this as well? Changing programs about having kind of larger defensive registrations. Once again, because of the work of Brian and Staten and things that those guys do, and some of the operations team where we were trying to find different contact information and developing tools in-house, like, hey, if we don't have who is, how do we get a hold of somebody, and finding ways to go and do that effectively. The biggest impact that we had was time. The actual efficiency of their program, time was involved, but compliance and all these things that we needed to get done was still there. We were still able to get done the things that we needed to, so it was really great.
Awesome.
Should I jump in? Something else that forces us to evolve or pushes us to evolve is just a certain law that's passed, and it may only be for specific locales, certain products. One that we saw, again with my software client, I think it was probably 3 years ago, maybe 4, but they passed this law called the Ranks Judgment in Europe. And what it did is, I don't know, all the details, but what it did basically is allowed sellers to sell secondhand software, even where in the past it was a violation of a licensing agreement. And so we were able to enforce on those. We went out after those aggressively for the client. And so when this law was passed, it was a really big deal. Our client had us hold off on enforcements for several months while their legal team researched what we could and could not enforce on. And eventually what happened is we modified the criteria, and it's very, very limited compared to what it used to be. And we had to evolve and adapt to that with our program. And so now, depending on where the listings are located, where they're being sold from, we have to follow different criteria. So let's say I can enforce on some sort of OEM software in the US. Well, in Europe, I can't enforce on that same product. And so we had to work closely with the client to make sure that we understood the criteria so that we didn't put them into any kind of legal liability to where they were getting sued because we enforced something in Europe that we weren't supposed to. And so, that law, the passing of that law, really changed the way that we were managing their program. And so we adapted accordingly, and so did the client.
Awesome. I think those are great examples of regulations that drive change. I know that there's some other great examples of unforeseen events that pop up that I was hoping Amy could talk about.
Sure. So we have some, it kind of depends. So we have some issues that come up that are very unexpected. Perhaps something happens where there's, it's headlining in the media, and so we need to make some quick adjustments. But then there's things like we have nonprofit organizations as customers that, and I didn't realize this until they were actually one of my customers, that natural disasters bring about, all sorts of imposters and people claiming to be with that organization, soliciting donations for, say, hurricane relief or things like that. And so it was something that I hadn't really thought of before, having a customer that had that very interesting, specific, unforeseen occurrence type problem. So
yeah, that's a huge one, and that's just goes to show that there's a lot of different avenues that we can protect consumers against bad actors, and it could be fraudulent donations, it could be software, it could be other streaming devices that are no good. So we've talked a lot about things that happen that we react to that lead to a change in brand protection focus. I think one of the areas to highlight are there's often, through the work that the analysts and customer success managers and others do within a brand protection program, we identify needs or identify trends that can push a brand protection program in a new direction and not necessarily force, but lead to an evolution that maybe was totally outside of the thoughts of the client, but it becomes a very necessary issue to address. And I love that we have a marching band practicing behind us right now. I feel like doing drumline or something. Okay. But again, to the collaboration and the proactive communication, what are some examples that you guys have come across where we've identified a trend or something that maybe wasn't evident to the client, brought it to their attention, and it led to an evolution in the program?
I think it was touched on a little bit yesterday, but I think a great example would be, had a customer several years ago that through our monthly reporting, we were finding counterfeit goods that were being sold in a specific country. And through that, they did some checks and balances internally, found that they didn't really have a presence in that country. And so through our efforts of just the reporting side of things and enforcement, found that they needed to have a presence, that it was worthwhile for them to move their product into that specific country. And so that was, I think, a great example of not necessarily proactive, but how kind of one thing led to another, and it worked out quite well for them.
Awesome.
Running that into one of my clients that I have. So one of the movie production studios is a client that I have. So they have a lot of very strange seasonal things that pop up a lot. It's a lot of reaction on that side of the house. Generally what they're concerned about is merchandising and things that pop up that way. One of the things through some of the efforts that we'd found, it wasn't a movie title, which is what the brands are that we're monitoring for them. They had a movie title that was relevant 20, 25 years ago, not as relevant today, or so they thought. And then we end up finding up through just some searching that we did, some items and some merchandising that was still being built around this brand that they'd owned that they didn't know that they had a problem with. So because of those efforts, we were able to shift some focus on that and start cleaning up, and found that, hey, there's still a lot of people that wanted to buy products around this particular brand. So they were able to revamp some of their sales strategy around that as well.
Awesome. That's great. One thing I think I forgot to mention in the very beginning in terms of flow of this this presentation of this panel discussion is I do want to end with, or at least open up the floor to any questions that you all may have about when to evolve a program, or just other things you may want to pick the panel of experts' brains about. And based on my notes, we're at that section where, did you guys have anything else that you wanted to add to the sections we talked about? So we've talked about client-driven changes, regulation and market changes, unforeseen changes, and then the proactive changes that can come about through our brand protection work. Is there anything else you guys had in mind that you wanted to?
No, I mean, I guess the only thing I'd just add a note in is that, once again, I mean, the largest driver of change or evolution in account is our partnership with you. You know, is our conversations back and forth and understanding the goals and objectives that you're trying to get done. It's one of the things that tends to get lost in focus when we start talking about the tactical everyday stuff that we do for you. You know, once you've been a client for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, it's really easy to lose track of what the overarching goals and objectives are. You know, what we're trying to get done for you. That may have changed for you internally, what you needed to get done. But we're still doing the same things for you because that's what we've been proven to be effective. Through conversations with you, we can make sure that we are trying to achieve the goals and objectives that you're setting out to do with, which will make it a whole lot easier when you're talking to somebody over the top of you, trying to justify the spend and what we're doing. You know, so we want to be able to work with you guys and be able to accomplish the goals that your companies are looking to do.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. So with that, I think I'll open it up to any audience questions. Anybody have? I feel like I'm neglecting the bulk of the room here. Sir, Shane?
Thank you, I might say. Are there any instances that you know of where evolving brand protection program isn't warranted? Stay the course, basically.
I'd like
Great question.
to address that. So I think, yes, we're always auditing accounts, I guess, for lack of a better word. And there are some cases, I have a large worldwide news organization as a customer right now that has a very standard business problem. It's copyright infringement. It's copyrighted images, verbiage. You know, we're always going in and looking at new ways to address their problem, but it's a pretty standard problem. And even though we're keeping an eye on it in case there are some changes, we really haven't, over the years, not had a need to make any major changes to the program.
Awesome.
No, I agree with that sentiment entirely. I mean, the fact of the matter is that, once again, if we are meeting the goals and objectives that you're working with, and we're doing things that work out, there are certain verticals, especially when you start talking about things like in the financial or website and domain world, where the problem is well defined. You know, we know what you're trying to get done. We have talked about it. We've got those goals set out, and we're doing those things. The intricacies of it might change year to year due to different laws or policies or things that happen that make us adjust to those things slightly, but the overall goal is still the same. So the program itself is still running exactly as it should.
Awesome. Other questions? We're in the great spot of holding people up from lunch, so it usually reduces the amount of questions. Nothing? Well, if there aren't any more questions, I think that some of the main takeaways that we've hit on throughout that we want to make sure that we leave everybody with are, you know, the close collaboration, and really maybe it's just one main point that Jeff made that I'll reiterate for everybody as we leave, is that, you know, close collaboration and communication is the key to an effective brand protection program. The more information you can share with us about the goals of your company, about the direction you're trying to take your brand protection program, and really just, you know, what's going on in the landscape of your company and of your industry can help us, the analysts, the success managers, everybody who works on your brand protection program to start thinking about what we can do to make it the most effective as we can. that's really what it comes down to. Proactive, consistent, constant communication is the key to an effective evolution of a brand protection program. And I think that's it, everybody. It's lunchtime, no more questions? All right.
Okay.
Awesome.